Hello and happy Thursday in March. Welcome everyone. We're going to get started here in maybe 2 minutes, giving everyone a chance to get in. If you want to go ahead and find the chat, even though you may have been with us for a couple of weeks now doing our presentations, we always love hearing about where you're working or seeing familiar names. So find the chat, give us your name, and then tell us about where you teach and what you teach. That might help with some of our discussion even tonight as we're talking about vocabulary, morphology, things like that. So find the chat, tell us a little bit about you again, or like usual, if you're here. Welcome, Deanna. Good to see you again. Donice. It's really fun seeing some of the same names. Recognizing your guys' names. I'm sure if we were in person, I'd recognize your face too. Welcome, Heather. Well, we're glad you're here too, Heather. Awesome, awesome. All right, welcome if you just joined us. We're about to get started here in a few minutes. Again, we just love getting to know who is joining us for our presentation. So if you'll find the chat, tell us a little bit about where you teach or what you do, or kind of your connection to dyslexia is what we're looking for as part of it. But then also kind of learning about, where your focus is. How are you trying to help students learn or kids learn? So. All right, we've got people kind of from around, some tutors even, that's great. School counselor, awesome. It's great too that we have counselors, because I'm sure that you're connecting with kids on a different level, or teens on a different level that maybe are experiencing some like emotional difficulties from having dyslexia, because that's definitely a thing. Well, welcome. We're probably not going to have you do a ton of writing today, but if you don't have anything to write with, definitely grab something to write with and a piece of paper, because we are going to be doing a little bit where you can write things down. Oh, another tutor. All right. Great. Awesome.
I think I recognize most names, a lot of names, but can we do a quick Y or N if you've seen us before too? That's always kind of a nice quick sample. Yes, if you've come to some of our presentations before. No, you've never seen us before. We're new to you.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. Yeah, so find that chat again. Put in a Y if you've seen us, or an N if you have not.
And you can keep adding what you're teaching too, because that's also really great information for us.
Mary, no worries. You're just joining. You probably have access to some of the other video recordings. We didn't record our very first one just because, I don't know, you'll learn more about us here in a second, but you might, if you're interested, we do have other videos. So awesome. So glad that everyone is here. Awesome.
Yeah.
It's really good to have some familiar faces here. Awesome. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. If you had just joined us, we're typing in the chat just a little bit about ourselves, where we're from, what we're teaching, or how we work with students, and then typing a Y for if you've been with us before, or an N if you have not. Then Angie, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, welcome you guys. I'm glad that you are here. So I'm Angie and Becca. We'll tell you a little bit more about ourselves in a second. We are part of Decoding Dyslexia, which is it's actually a national nonprofit, and then they they go down to the state level. So we're part of the Decoding Dyslexia Oregon. And then down smaller than that, they try to find, trying to create kind of like specific chapters for certain areas. I feel like what's happened in COVID is more as those specific chapters are kind of all blended together because so much is online. So, so we created this South Valley Decoding Dyslexia chapter, but really it feels like we're kind of part of Oregon Decoding Dyslexia, which has some good roots and basis in Portland. So we have people from all over Oregon, which is really exciting. So this presentation will be emailed to you. You'll have it. It's being recorded, so you'll get a copy of the recording and you'll get a copy of the slideshow. And we do ask what Decoding Dyslexia is doing for us is they created a web page that has all of our recordings and all of our slideshows into one place. So you should have access to that. It's on one of the slides here, and it was on one of the last slides. So that way all of our stuff is kind of going into one place. We are recording this, but we do ask that the recording is really just for participants and people that have registered and maybe couldn't make it, not for like general viewing for your staff or something like that. And the reason why is because if you're going to play something for a group of people to really study together, there's better experts out there. We are just really excited to have you join our journey of learning, but that's what it is. We are not officially experts, and we haven't gone through a lot of trainings or done a lot that there's a lot out there that from people that we learn from. So you're joining in our journey of learning, but we are recording this so that you can join us, not so that you can take this and share it, because we feel like we're not truly that experts. But there is the web page. So that's why we didn't start recording them right away. But on that web page, so some of you that haven't seen some of the other ones or are more interested in going into our other topics that we've done before, you can go back and look at some of the slideshows and some of the recordings. I think it was the first 1 or 2 that we didn't record though. So just to know about that. So please also keep the chat active. We love an active chat. So ask questions, share ideas, reflect, keep that an active place where a discussion can be happening at the same time. That's something that we really enjoy as we teach. So feel free to chat it up. So a little bit about me. There are some people that are new to us today. So my name is Angie Pebworth. I am a first grade teacher. This is my 17th year of teaching. I've taught mostly first and second grade. And I really started this journey because of my son, who's now 13 and he's a 7th grader. And when he was a kinder, first, second, he was not learning how to read. And his amazing teachers and I, who had been teaching for quite a while at that time, all kind of looked at him and said, oh, it'll click, he's a late bloomer. And it didn't. And it wasn't until 3rd grade that we really started going, something's going on here. And I figured out that he has dyslexia. And he got an IEP in 3rd grade. And as I was learning about why my son wasn't learning how to read, I just discovered how much I didn't know about how kids really know how to read. I discovered how little I knew about how kids learn how to read. And so this has just become my passion and my something that's really interesting to me. So I've read a lot and watched webinars and listened to podcasts and talked to Becca a lot about it. Becca.
I'm Rebecca Hauge. I go by Becca, and I love learning about dyslexia. Angie and I talk a lot about it. I went through a training back when it was mandated by Oregon that every elementary school have a dyslexia specialist. So I went through training with Portland PDX reading specialist, Barbara, back in 2018, and just really was intriguing and helped me understand myself better because I am dyslexic. And I didn't realize it until I went through the training, which was fascinating. And as I've been doing this work with Angie, I've learned more about myself and more about my students. And I'm a special education teacher and I've taught for 12 years. So it really like fits into everything I do anyways. So it's nice to know and learn more information. So we're glad you guys are here.
So tonight we're talking about more vocabulary and morphology. And this is just a quick little video that kind of talks about more than vocabulary and morphology, but the message of this is that our language does make sense. And feel like for so many years I've been saying it just doesn't make sense. That's just a weird word. And we all say that. That's kind of a common thing in our culture to be like, "It's so weird." But it does make sense. So let's listen to Jennifer explain this a little bit more.
Hi, this is Jennifer Hasser, and I wanted to talk to you today about the fact that our language actually makes sense. So many people think that our language is crazy, and the reality is our language is not crazy. The crazy thing is that nobody ever told us the rules of our language, and we all grew up with kind of a hybrid whole language, which is look at the word, read more on your own, memorize it, practice it, a little bit of basic phonics telling us just the sounds. And then none of the advanced phonics that you would get past first grade. And it's kind of like expecting somebody to play a game and not telling them the rules. So if we knew the rules of our language, it would make so much more sense, and it would be so much easier for the kids. And the fact is we only have 44 sounds in our language, and we have 6 syllable types. And when you combine those, you can read 100,000 words. You don't have to memorize 100,000 words because they go together. The vowels, people think our language doesn't make sense because A can say A, it can say it can say it can say ah. So like, how do I know? It's just random. And kids try to guess. But the reality is there are reasons why letters change, especially vowels, why vowels change their sounds, and it has to do with their placement within a word. So if it's in an open syllable, an A is going to say its name, like A. So like baby, that's considered an open syllable. And if it's in a closed syllable, it's going to say its sound. So you would have cat. And if we can teach kids those rules that govern them, then they can take apart any word. It doesn't have to be cat, it can be catastrophe. They're going to start to see the patterns within words. They're going to start to see that if they can read unicorn, they can read cornucopia. And they'll start to notice that, wait, unicorn means one horn, and cornucopia means horn of plenty. So once kids start to realize that our language makes sense, then they start to look for the patterns. And once you see the patterns, they're very hard to unsee, and their vocabulary grows exponentially. But when we tell them our language is crazy and they believe our language is crazy, then they don't look for the patterns, and it lessens their vocabulary, it lessens their opportunities for learning. And I really honestly think we do a great disservice to children when we tell them that our language doesn't make sense, because it really does. And it would make their life so much easier if they knew the rules to the game. Thank you so much.
Jennifer Hasser is part of a organization called Kendor Learning, and she was where I first actually learned the word morphology. I went to the International Dyslexia Association conference a few years ago and went to one of her breakout sessions in person. She's hilarious and really fun to learn from. And she has a lot on YouTube. She has a handful of free webinars on YouTube, and she also does some online classes, and morphology is kind of like her passion. Dyslexia is her specialty. And I just really like that. She spoke about a lot of stuff that we've already talked about, of syllable types and spelling rules and phonics patterns and sounds in English. And really what all that is coming together to is now we're kind of taking it all and like, okay, what does this all mean? And we're going into meaning tonight. And it does make sense. And even the meaning of word makes sense and is connected to all that. So we need to make sure that we stop saying English doesn't make sense, because it really does. And so this is something that I actually learned from her when I learned what morphology really was. And she said, and this was her example, saying that you can teach this even to kindergartners. And they're not gonna learn how to read or write helicopter or pterodactyl, but these two words make sense when you know some of the meanings of the words. So helicopter, helic is spiral, and PTER means flying. So a helicopter is something that flies using a spiral that spins around. A pterodactyl, PTER, it means flying, again, still, of course. And dactyl is like finger or digit. So they called it that because it looked like a flying finger. So they're pronounced different, but the spelling is the same, and the meaning of PTER is flying, and you'll even see that in other places. So it's knowing this, kids will always remember how to spell them once, not kindergartners, but they'll know how to spell them. They'll understand what they mean, and they'll make this, like we're showing, look at this really cool stuff makes sense. And pterodactyl is not a weird word with a silent P. It actually makes sense because it has this connection of meaning. So kind of stepping back and looking at the big picture of what we've been talking about every month, and where this also fits in with the part of the reading as whole. So this is the reading rope, and it talks about the simple view of reading and how there's these kind of two main parts with a lot of smaller parts that all come together for us to become skilled readers. So language comprehension is all the different parts that need to come together for us to understand what we're reading and writing. And the blue, the word recognition, is all those like rules of spelling and reading and hearing the sounds, the word recognition. Tonight's presentation on vocabulary and morphology really kind of fits into a few places of this. So it fits into vocabulary, language structures, because it's meanings of words and how they fit in. And then in word recognition, it will tie in with decoding and encoding. So it'll kind of be with both of those, with reading and with writing, is all connected into these word parts and morphemes too. When you take these two parts of the rope, and now this shows how the first column, the decoding, is that red part of the rope. Did I get the colors backwards? Is the word recognition part of the rope, and then the language comprehension part of the rope. And this is really how this shows how that rope is so complicated together, and how it intertwines together to create successful readers, and how you need both, and they really do work together. So if kids are strong, 100% decoders and 100% with language, if they are both, and it's a multiplication problem, and that means that they're 100% readers. If they have a 0% skill level in one of those, then they become like 0% of being able to read. So I could decode and understand all the spelling rules and all the pronunciation rules, and decode really complex words that I have no idea what they mean. And so I have no comprehension. If I can't decode and sound out any words, but I have a really high vocabulary, then I'm still not a reader because I have 0% ability to decode them. And if I'm weak in one of those, if I'm only at 50% at one of those two areas, it just is multiplied in my skills as readers. Does that make sense? It just, both of them are very complicated, and they work together.
All right, so this is something we've reviewed several times, and we just kind of keep adding to this. So thinking about your students with dyslexia, we talked about how they have difficulty with sounds, whether hearing them or knowing them and being able to apply it to reading, writing. And these are some of the symptoms you'll see. And I will comment again that reversals in letters is not a sign of dyslexia. There are students that will reverse letters in general because they're very similar looking, like B and D and P and Q. But that is a sign as well. Something I wanted to add on though, so students are going to avoid using words or spelling words, which we're going to get into a little bit more because they can't think of what the word is, or they don't know how to spell it because it's too hard, kind of like this picture shows. The other thing too, I was thinking is, they might misunderstand words and or misuse words because that's just part of what they're trying to figure out, especially if they're using the wrong sounds or using the incorrect letters to write things. I came across this mug and I was like, this is me, because I understand things, but sometimes language escapes my mouth and I cannot explain what I'm trying to explain. Like I can feel it in my brain, but the words are not there. And I I accidentally said the saying, you know, that we'll cross that bridge when we get there to my friend. I used the word burn. We'll burn down that bridge when we get there. And my friend was like, oh, really? We're going to burn it down? And I was like, oh, what? So I like misused word and like a saying that's really common. But for me, as someone that is dyslexic, that's just part of my world. So it's also pretty funny, and I need to get the mug. So as you're thinking about your kiddos here, there's kind of like these three pieces of students with dyslexia that impacts them. And not everyone is impacted in all areas. So phonology is that ability to hear sounds and even manipulate sounds. And then, and that's like the spoken sound of our language. Then there's orthography, the writing piece, reading, and then language comprehension. So the students we've been focusing on for the first couple sessions we've been doing are focused in that phonology and orthography where, you know, can they hear the sounds? Can they manipulate them, then apply it and read words? And then can they write them? So now we're at a point where we're looking at that language comprehension and how it's going to impact students with dyslexia if we're not teaching it in the way that we want to try and present. So I also want to point out too that we have these two sides, the social emotional and the memory and attention and executive functions, which are pieces of students with dyslexia that they will maybe be impacted in those areas. And I bring up the social emotional because sometimes you'll have students that they'll have a lot of anxiety or not want to come to school because of their dyslexia. So.
Okay, so a little bit of common vocabulary for us just to make sure that we all know. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit. So phoneme and grapheme and morpheme are all really important parts that have to do with reading. Phoneme is the sound that we hear. It's a single sound in a word. So it's all what we hear or say, nothing that's written. And it's the smallest sound that you can make, and it usually will change the meaning. If you change a phoneme in a word, it'll change the meaning, but the phoneme itself doesn't carry any meaning itself. So when I change bat to cat, I'm changing the phoneme b to k. B by itself doesn't have a meaning, but changing that one sound changes the meaning of the word. So a grapheme is the letters that match that sound or a single sound. So sometimes it's one, like all right, is spelled M. Sometimes a grapheme could be two letters, like SH says sh, and sometimes it can be 3 or 4 even. And then what our focus is tonight is morphemes, which is the part, the smallest part of a word that carries meaning. So it's the part, and we're going to go into this more. Affixes we'll be talking about tonight. Affixes is the general umbrella term that includes prefixes and suffixes. We're also going to be talking about root words and base words tonight. So we're going to be going more into all of this, or into morphemes, I should say. Decoding and encoding. We keep this slide in here every time because it's so important for us to know these vocabularies and also just know that they are so connected with each other. So decoding is reading and sounding out the words to read them. Encoding is sounding out the words to write them. So encoding is writing, decoding is reading, and they are so intertwined that everything we teach should be taught with both encoding and decoding together with the same skill. So this connects with morphology and vocabulary because obviously when we decode, we use morphology because if we understand the words and what they mean, that helps us understand what we're decoding. We also use it a lot in encoding because if we understand why something is spelled a different way, if we spell for meaning, it can help us a lot with our spelling. Today, my first graders were, we were working on the word parked, and it sounds like a t at the end, but we knew that we were talking about something in the past tense. So we know that it's not spelled with a t. So we weren't spelling based on sound, we were spelling based on meaning. And we knew that it was ED because it was past tense. So, so it helps by knowing this stuff, it helps us encode and decode more successfully. Okay, so we're gonna, we kind of have two parts. Vocabulary is a smaller part tonight, and then morphology is a bigger part because there's a lot more to it. And vocabulary kind of encompasses or overviews both of it. So a lot of what we have talked about in past months and a lot of what I think about tends to be spelling rules and sounding out and hearing sounds in words and blending them together and knowing all the phonics and bringing it all together. But what it all comes down to is if I can sound out a word, but I have no idea what it means, then it is not going to help me be a successful reader. And I like this example because yak is a CVC word. It's a very simple word. All my first graders, well, hopefully most of my first graders can sound that out at this point, but they don't all know what a yak is. So if you can sound it out, but you don't know what it is, you're going to be second guessing yourself. Is this a real word? Have I decoded it properly? And so we need to have knowledge about what words mean, because once we apply those phonics and spelling and decoding rules that we are learning, we need to be able to know, okay, is this a word? What does this word mean? Reading for meaning. So with vocabulary, Deanna, you'll recognize this because this is second grade curriculum and it's such a great book. This is a page from Click Clack Moo. And why I liked the copy of this book is because it really shows that books have a level of vocabulary that we don't use in spoken language. This page of this book says, duck was a neutral party, so he brought the ultimatum to the cows. And the story is a simple picture book that is in Journey second grade curriculum, but it also is just a fun picture book. And it is packed with all these words that we wouldn't normally use in everyday language. Most second graders aren't going to be exposed to neutral party or the word neutral necessarily, or the word ultimatum. But when it comes up in writing and reading, we have the ability to increase their vocabulary a lot. So it's really important. That's why we, with parents, encourage them to read to their kids, because it is exposing them to words that don't come up just around the dinner table or hanging out, or even in TV shows that they're watching. There's the level of vocabulary in literature and in written word is a much higher level. So it really increases their exposure to different words. Another example that I wanted to put in here too is my students really loved this year the Mercy Watson series by Kate DiCamillo, and one of the things that one of the main characters keeps talking about Mercy Watson, who's a pig, is oh, she's a porcine wonder, and so they were exposed. We talked about wonder, what wonder means, but porcine is not a word that and I don't even know 100%. I could be pronouncing it wrong because I have dyslexia too, but I think that's how you pronounce it. That's how I did at least. But it's not a word that they're ever going to be just casually exposed to. So by reading, they were exposed to this higher vocabulary than we would have just casually talked about. So kind of following that, vocabulary also has different levels to it. These are two different graphics that show how vocabulary has levels in two different ways. So the one on the left, the ovals, it's talking about how when we are talking about vocabulary, there's actually 4 different levels of vocabulary. And this, these ovals are in comparison to the size of our vocabulary, any person's vocabulary. So people have the largest listening vocabulary. So there's a lot of words that I hear somebody say and I know what they mean, or I recognize them. Then my next biggest vocabulary bubble is my reading vocabulary. I can read words and I can hear and I can understand what they mean. Words that I speak is a little smaller, and words that I write is even smaller. This I have noticed really is true for me because I do have dyslexia, not kind of mild dyslexia, but because of my dyslexia. And if you think about students that are limited with dyslexia, that's the wrong way to say that. Students that are impacted by dyslexia, their spelling is hard. So I don't write a lot of words that I know I can't spell. And because with my dyslexia, I get words mixed up. A lot of times I will choose less complex vocabulary words because I'm afraid that I'll misuse a word. But if somebody else uses that word, I know what it means. Or if I read it, I know what it means. I just don't always recall it to speak or write it. So our vocabulary size changes depending on what we're talking about, how we use that vocabulary. The graphic on the right with the different tiers is a reflection about how there's some words that are more common and some words that are less common. So the tier 1 are words that are commonly used in spoken language. So pen, go, ruler, slow. These are words that do come up in our everyday language that most people will know what they mean. Tier 2 words are words that are found primarily in written text in those books, which is why we're reading to kids. And they're a little bit less common. Visible, intend, brief are their examples. And then tier 3 words are words that are specific to what you are studying, like your specific unit of study or your specific unit of focus. So they're the language that is for that focus or that specific area. One example of that too is like that I wanted to add as an example is like the way our language is bigger when we're spoken. My students, we were talking about bones back in October, and they really fell in love with the word phalanges, which are your finger bones and your toe bones. And they'll still say, like, just last week I was reteaching learning position, and I was like, and hands on your desk. And one of my students said, phalanges on your desk. And I was like, yes. And he knew that word. He would have no idea how to spell it or read it. I don't even really know how to spell it very well either. But he knew what it meant because our spoken language is bigger and our oral language is bigger than what we can often read and write. Okay, back on.
Thanks, Angie. All right, so now we're going to get into morphology and etymology. So when we think about morphology, if you're a science teacher or if you remember science class, you might be thinking that morphology is the study of the forms of living things, because that would be the scientific explanation. But for a linguist, somebody that studies language, it's actually looking and studying words and the forms of words. So here's taking the two parts, so the morphemes, morph and ology, and giving their description. So while we're thinking about teaching vocabulary, and I do encourage you to teach vocabulary to your students because obviously they don't always have access to it if they can't read it. But when you're thinking about vocabulary, I really think we need to think about the parts of the word so that when students learn the parts of the word, they can take what they learned and apply it to other words that have the same parts. So essentially, the whole world of language is opened up to them, not only in reading and writing, but also with just comprehension and hopefully in using the word themselves. And it'll also unlock spelling patterns for them, which you're going to see here as we keep going. And even definitions. So here we go. I do have a video posted here about the origins of language. We're not going to watch it right now, but it is focused on where English came from, and it doesn't go into all of the parts that we're going to go into tonight, but I'd encourage you to watch it if you like watching cute little videos, and it's a TED Talk, so it's interesting, has cute graphics, but we're not going to watch it right now because I want to get into some of the fun stuff. All right, so when we think about English, oops, sorry, I do this a lot. I like to click on the parts that are linked. So English is made up of a lot of different languages, which you probably know. It's probably why you think that English is so hard to spell, because we're taking the Latin part, the Latin roots or the AngloSaxon roots and trying to figure out, well, how do you spell this word? And if you don't understand where it comes from, then it makes it really hard. So what we're going to try and do tonight is show you how you can make it easier for yourself and for students so that they're not feeling like it's inaccessible. The big languages that I'm going to focus on tonight are the Anglo-Saxon, Latin, and the Greek. And if you think of that other triangle that Angie showed you, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, this follows the same pattern. Our Anglo-Saxon is that tier 1, Latin is the tier 2, and tier 3 is the Greek. So it's really funny. I found this really, well, actually Angie found this really great example of all of these different parts of words and where they come from. And they're from Lisa Moats and letters training or letters reading big words. So a lot of this is linked right here in the presentation for Lisa Moats. So the first one is the Anglo-Saxon. So this is your tier 1. It comes from Old English language or Beowulf, if you ever tried to read that. But they're the very common words. They're easy to explain. Some of them have odd spellings. So I put up some examples here, but essentially it's like the words that we're using every day, the words that the students know that they're going to be reading, writing all the time. That's your Anglo-Saxon. So that is a lot of the words they're going to come across. Then we have our Latin and Romance languages. So for Latin Romance languages, these are the tier 2. So they're a little bit more precise, sophisticated words, and they have, you'll find them in multiple disciplines. So you'll see them in biology or sciences, social sciences, literature. So I've put on here the top 18 Latin roots and their meanings that a gentleman that I have linked down here recommended that are taught, because students are going to come across them a lot. So it's important for them to understand these so that they can apply them to the words that they come across. So like when you think of port, port is in a lot of things, including airport. So when you teach them that word port, then it opens up their world to other words. This is just a quick example that I found at All About Reading and All About Spelling, which is linked. You could use this at a lower level. So teaching a Latin root and then creating words based on this diagram that we have below. And we're gonna talk about how to do this later on, but I wanted to show you that you could do this at a younger level. And there's lots of materials already created that you don't have to make on your own. Okay, then we have words coming from Greek. So they kind of have some different spellings, as you can see up at the top, but these words are your tier 3. So they're very specific to the area that they're talking about. So for example, biology is the one I always go to, and I was thinking of a word like photosynthesis. Obviously, if you had biology in high school and had to learn about photosynthesis, that's a vocabulary word you had to learn, which is great. Teach that vocabulary word, but please consider teaching photo, because if you look at the meaning of photo, it means light. And there are a lot of other words that I can think of right now that have the word photo in them that would be helpful for students to recognize and then hopefully be able to spell as well, because they remember what the meaning is. So by teaching this word part, it kind of opens up more words to them. And that's what we're proposing to you tonight. So these are just the top 20 Greek forms that are very common that you're going to come across in your sciences and things like that. And then this was not in the triangle, but it was also presented by Lisa Motes, and I've seen it in other places. So we do have a lot of French words as well. They kind of have some different spellings. This is the reason why the C and the G changes sounds when they're followed by E, I, or Y. So if you look at our, let's see, triage, the G is changing its sound because it's followed by the E. We have justice with that C saying the S sound. And then it also has different spellings like in boutique and coupon or coupon, depending on how you pronounce it. So these are just some examples. So it's helpful to know kind of where they come from, because that could help with spelling. If you know that it's a French word, then you might be able to guess that, oh, it's not a J for the J sound, it's a G followed by an E or an I or a Y.
Okay, so back to morphemes a little bit too, and not just where they come from, but this is Jennifer Hazard again, and talking about types of morphemes. There's 2 main types, bound and free. She goes into this, and there's a chart there you can look at while she's talking to about it more.
Hi, this is Jennifer Hasser with Kendor Learning, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about morphemes. So morphemes are units of meaning in words, and oftentimes you can have one word that has 3 or 4 different units of meaning embedded inside of it. So there are different types of morphemes, and the 2 most common types, one is called a free morpheme and one is called a bound morpheme. So a free morpheme is a morpheme that can stand alone. So if you had the word teach, teach can stand alone, and then you can add other morphemes to it, like teacher or teaching or unteachable. All of those are morphemes that you can put together, but teach can stand alone. Now, if you had one like rupt, which means to break, it can't stand alone, because you would never say, oh, don't rupt that glass. You would say, don't break that glass. But rupt would be like erupt. So it means like if a volcano erupted, then it would break out. And then that ed at the end would be past tense of erupt. So if you had disrupt, interrupt, all of those mean break. So if you interrupt somebody, you break in between them. And so that would be a morpheme that can not stand alone. So if you had a word like invisible, in meaning not, vis meaning to see, and able, those three don't stand alone because it's ends in an IBLE. But if you have dependable, then you're going to have depend, which could stand on its own, and able, that able, ABLE, can stand alone. So morphemes are really important. A lot of our free morphemes tend to be like Anglo-Saxon of origin, and then most of our bound morphemes tend to be Greek or Latin. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about free and bound morphemes, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much.
So I kind of like just thinking about that, and we can teach kids that too, as we are, these things that we are learning, we can also teach directly to our students as they are ready for it. There we go. Okay, so etymology is where our words come from. And this is the different area, like we've talked about where they come from, but also the etymology can tell us exactly why they are connected to each other. So all of these words are connected together: one, only, alone, once, atone, and onion, and none. And by knowing that these are connected, I'm going to explain why a little bit more in a second, or a video will explain why in a minute. But knowing the connection makes the spelling makes a lot more sense. And so we are able to spell them, and the definitions of them make a lot more sense. So the video actually goes into how these are all connected. So let's watch this. This is about a 4 or 5 minute TED Talk that's really great.
As students, we're constantly evaluated.
There you go.
You have probably seen an email or an internet post about how weird and random English spelling seems to be. But what if I told you that it actually makes perfect sense? In fact, that's spelling's job, making sense. Think of spelling a word as peeling back the layers of an onion. The first layer is a word's sense and meaning. Often there are multiple layers of meaning. Another layer is the word's structure. Think of the center of the onion as a word's base element, its essential kernel of meaning. A free base element like ONE or TWO can stand on its own as a word, like one or two. A bound base, like the RUPT of erupt or rupture, needs another element in order to surface in a word. Two or more bases give us compounds, like twofold or someone or bankrupt. Once we figure out a word's meaningful elements, we can peel back its history to shed a little more light on why it's spelled as it is. The word to, for example, needs its W in order to mark its connection to words like twice, 12, 20, twin, and between. A word's history is another layer of the onion. With that understanding, let's investigate the word one. First, we need to check in with what it means. Unique, single, solitary. One's historical layers include its relatives only, once, 11, and even n, and any. But it's the morphological relatives, the ones that share the base ONE, that are really astonishing. There are the familiar ones like anyone and one track and oneself. Those are obvious. But let's take a look at some unexpected derivations of the word one. The word alone is built from the prefix al plus the base one. It's the same al prefix that we see in always, already, almighty, and almost. It means all. The word alone means all one. It was misanalyzed in the Middle Ages as having the prefix a, like in asleep and awake and around, and a new base was born, lone, which then developed into its own family. In the word atone, we find the familiar preposition at, compounded with the base one. See, when we atone for something we've done wrong, we attempt to make things whole again, to fix what's broken, to be at one again with whomever we hurt. But here's perhaps the best one of all, the word onion, which is also frequently derided as irregular or crazy for its spelling of with an O. But again, if we look into the word structure and its history, it's a mystery no more. When we look at the roots of an onion, we learn that it is written as one plus ion, the same suffix we find in tension, action, union, and thousands of other words in English. Unlike the many cloves and a head of garlic, an onion has a single bulb. It is marked by the state or condition of oneness. Like an onion, English is one single writing system shared across time and space. Its structure and its history have many layers, and peeling them apart can really add flavor to our language and spice up our understanding. See, spelling is never just about spelling, but about how written words make sense. It's almost enough to make you want to cry.
I love that. I'm becoming such a language nerd that I love things like that. And I think it's because it's partly my dyslexia. It's like, oh my gosh, now it makes sense. And I know this connection. I know how to spell them better and I understand them. So here's another example of this. If we are thinking about where our words come from and what those morphemes mean, looking at these three words, transport, transgress, and transaction, instead of teaching these as individual vocabulary words to learn, if we teach the word parts, it makes a lot more sense of what they mean. And it also is giving kids tools to go into even more words. So trans means going across, going from one place to another, going across something. Port means to carry. So when you're transporting something, you're going across to carry, you're carrying something across somewhere. Transgress is to go. So transgress is like to cross a boundary or a rule or law. So it's going across a rule, a boundary, a law, something like that. Transaction, action is to do. So that's transaction is like going across back and forth. And then when they know these, you can also like take things like, okay, so what else can we make with port? We could make export, import, portable. With gress, you can make egress, like to go out and or leave, or regress, like to go back again, right? And or even action is like reaction is to go back or to react back to something. So by knowing these word parts, these words make sense, but also it opens up to a whole lot more other words. This is a resource. There's a few different ways to kind of get to find this out when you are studying words. Etymology online is a go-to where you can type in any word and I'll tell you kind of where it's come from. I also find that if I just Google where did the word such and such come from, that I get a lot of information that way. So that's where I find a lot of my information when I'm looking for stuff. But by knowing these meanings, it becomes like this mental Velcro that makes the knowledge of spelling and meaning stick. And it increases our capacity to learn and understand more and more new words. So this is a really effective way of teaching and learning for all of us. There, it's coming. So kind of touching into morphemes again, and going back to kind of the glued and or the free and the bound, is a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. So there's a base word or a root word, and then there's affixes. There's the prefixes and the suffixes. And so here's some like word families. And so played is play, and ed for meaning in the past, plays or play. So play is a morpheme, s is a morpheme, and ed is a morpheme. Redo, undo, and do. And rupt, this was mentioned in a video too. Erupt, so rupt is the center of rupt is the bound morpheme. You can't have rupt by itself like you can with do or play. It always is bound to something, but it has that common meaning of breaking apart. So erupt, rupture, interrupting. And so prefixes are words that come before the base word, and suffixes are the ones that come at the end or after the base word. Sometimes you can have more than one prefix, so that's not always the very first thing, because sometimes it's the second prefix, or there might be two prefixes before it or two suffixes afterwards, but it's an additional, it's an added part of the word that comes before prefix or suffix for after. And just to point out too, especially if you're making a bigger connection with other things that we've talked about, prefixes and suffixes are not syllable types. So base words will follow syllable type rules, but prefixes and suffixes are their own. They don't necessarily follow a syllable type if you've studied the 6 or 7 syllable types.
Okay, so now we're going to go into teaching all of these parts. So when you think about a prefix, it's important to teach the ones that are going to come up a lot. So you can see I've highlighted some of the ones that were presented in this research that come up a lot, like in, dis, re, and they occur in more than 58% of 3,000 words in textbooks. So it's important for kids to understand what those are. Once they're heading into 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, some kids can learn re right away because they're already hearing it, or pre, like pre-cook, pre-do something before you cook it. I can't think of something right now, but so it's just this idea that when you're highlighting these parts to students, they're going to make connections anyways because their listening and speaking vocabulary is higher than their reading and writing. But it's important for them to know this so that when they come to a word that they're unsure of, looking for these parts will help them be able to figure out what the word is. And a guy named, I just forgot his name, Van Cleve, we're going to come across him later. He presents this idea too, that when you're teaching prefixes, to spell them out. So say IN for in, and then put it on the word and then read the word, just because sometimes prefixes don't have the same sound. Like for example, con, C-O-N, see, I just said con. So in the word contraction, it sounds like it's saying to me in the C-O-N part. So, so contraction, but a contract, the con has a different sound. So, so teaching it, spelling it out is more important. And it also is emphasizing that this is a prefix. It's different from when we're reading the word parts. Uh-oh. Can you guys see the screen okay? Okay, so it's just Angie that's having problems seeing the screen.
No, it was one person. So hopefully that person, if once you get a copy of it, you'll be able to go back and look. Okay. Or hopefully it'll catch up with itself.
Yeah, hopefully it'll catch up.
I can
Sorry
see it.
about that. So I have some examples here of flashcards that I have, and notice that they're green because the idea is that the prefixes are usually in front of the base word, and also kind of teaching students that not teaching that it's in the beginning. And this is new to me because of that idea that Angie was talking about, that there's more than one, there can be more than one prefix. So teaching them that they come they attach at the beginning so that students can then see how they connect, which we'll show you here in a second. The nice things about these cards is that on the back, it also shows what the meaning is and then gives you examples. So dis means not or opposite. And then an example is dislike, distaste. So when you think now about our suffixes, these are the 10 most common suffixes. And then they've got asterisks to show the ones that come up the most. So the one with just one little asterisk comes up 65% in 2000 of the 2,000 common suffixes, right? So adding on the S or the ES, right? So students really need to know what that means. So when you present the word cats, you know, the animal that you can have as a pet, and you ask them to draw a picture, that'll look different than if you ask a student to draw a picture of a cat, right? They'd only be drawing one. So making sure that they understand that piece, that morpheme that is being added on at the end of a word is changing the meaning. So, and again, I have cards for the suffixes, and notice that they're red because they're coming at the end or attaching at the end of the base word. Here's an example of a wall that I had previously, and I'd write the root word or the base word in the middle, and then we could try and figure out words. And the other thing too that I think would be really helpful for students is that you can grab those cards to like show them and practice them, and or, you know, for kids to practice, you know, you can add a word onto, or a morpheme or the prefix onto the word part or to the base word, and then they can create new words. So it's pretty fun. Here's some other examples. This is also from All About Reading. So teaching students that some suffixes start with a vowel and some start with a consonant. And this is very important when it comes to spelling rules. So, and then also for them just to identify that. This is another activity you can do when they're working on reading. So we have these cute little mice, and you can put a little blanket on them, and the student would practice reading the word sleep, and then remove the blanket and read sleeping. So, but kind of going to the more complex version now is the structured word inquiry. So this is where we're taking our base word like book and then adding on something to the beginning and something to the end. As you can tell, we have some other base words, which is making those compound words. So like scrapbook, bookstore, things like that. But then we have our suffixes that we can add on to book to make more words. So we're going to do some examples. So if you have your piece of paper and a pencil, this is where you're going to be using it. And we're going to practice making words using structured reading inquiry or word inquiry. This is another example of a word inquiry that includes more parts. So you can see we have our base word, which is struct, which means to build. And then attached at the beginning, we have con or d or in, sub, etc. But notice that you can do reconstruct, and that's why we've got kind of two columns set up there so that you can add on more than one prefix. And then the same thing with the suffixes. You can add on IVE and then add on LY. So structively. Okay, so you're having students, when you do activities like this, really play with words and the meanings. And if students know what the meanings are of those suffixes, ideally that's what you'd want to do. It really will like help them understand our language even better. Okay, so on your piece of paper, here's your task. I'm not going to give you any prefixes or suffixes. Your base word is the word graph, which means to write. So see how many words you can come up with. All right, now that you've had some time to think, go ahead and start typing some in the chat. So what did you come up with for graph? What kind of words did you make out of graph? And if you need some help here, we have some examples that go before and after some prefixes and suffixes. Ooh, we got some common ones. Nice. Oh, cool. Excellent. So we got some great ideas in the chat with graphite, telegraph, phonograph, photographer, autograph. So just kind of a lot of ideas. So what you could do with this is you could have kids come up with ones on their own. And one of the guys that we'll talk about later, he recommends that you don't provide prefixes and suffixes. So it just depends on who you're working with. The population I work with, I would provide it. But you could do activities where they're trying to come up with words. The other thing you can do is that you can give them a word and try and have them figure out what it means based on the word parts. So carta means making maps, and is someone who does something. So a cartographer is someone that makes maps. And then finally, what I would recommend, because this helps students play with words and makes them just really get more engaged, is have them come up with a word of their own. So I came up with the word emotographer. So an emoticon represents a facial expression. So it's a little like smiley faces. So I thought, you know, someone who makes those would probably be called an emotographer. And I've attached a video here that kind of talks about how to do the structured word inquiry here. All right, so.
Can I add into that video? If you teach first or second grade, go back and watch that video at some point, because it kind of teaches, it's how I started when I taught second grade before using it. And it teaches kind of how to do this in even a simpler way and it uses the word, it kind of teaches you how to do it even the first way, use their exact same word, which was play, because you don't have to change the Y to anything. There's no changing of the base word. It was simple, and it just, and it shows kind of a way that my second grade class was doing it once a week. We'd have a way that we would work with words like this, but it just kind of is a nice primary example. So if you're a first, second grade teacher, go back and check out that video. That's just a link at that bottom of that structured word slide.
Thanks, Angie. All right, so thinking about morphemes. So why are we teaching morphemes? Obviously, you're probably picking up on the reasons why, but I wanted to tell you too that with morphemes, obviously they make up our language, and the way language works is that people talk, and then that turns into communication with one another, which then goes in the dictionary. So really our language is coming from people talking and then going into the dictionary. So that's another reason why it's really important to teach parts of words so that students can better understand what people are talking about. So a word that is brand new in the dictionary in this year, or 2021, is the word deplatform, which if you've been following what's going on in the last 2 years, you might know what that is referring to. But I put the definition there, but that is a brand new word that someone came up with because we're all online now in social media. Something that I was unaware of was the word cringy. One of my third graders last year was using it after we were doing a Go Noodle. I understood the word, like, it makes me cringe, like the word cringe, but I didn't understand how he was using cringy with the Go Noodle. So I needed another adult and another student to help me understand that. But if I would have thought about the word parts, like the Y added on to the cringe, it probably would have helped me a little more with my understanding. So that's another reason, because people are coming up with new words all the time. So, and they're using what we already have in our language to make new words. This is just another resource if you want to do some morpheme practice with students. This one's great because it gives you everything that you need, including all the answer keys. And it's connected to on this link over here with this great quote that's just talking about how students do not need to have complete mastery of English letter sound patterns to begin combining high frequency bases or roots with common prefixes and suffixes. Because the idea is that they're just taking the word parts, and if they understand what they mean, they can make the words. Okay, it's really great. Okay, so Van Cleve. This is an awesome video. He gives a lot more examples of how to work with morphemes and shows you like what it means with different words. So I just took a few things from his video here, but it's linked there. So like with the word contraction, sometimes you're going to want to think about the phonological piece for spelling. So contraction has 3 syllables. So therefore that is how it's divided up phonologically. So when the kid is working on spelling it, that's what helps them. But what I learned when I was watching his video is that TION is not a suffix. The suffix is actually ION. So when you're thinking about it morphologically or based on meaning, contract and yun, ION, remember what he said? He said to spell it out, ION. Knowing what those parts mean is what is more important for students, because then they can read way more words and understand the words that they're reading without you having to tell them the definition of everything. Yep.
So
Trying to play his video. And this is just another example that he gave. So like when you're teaching meaning,
hello, welcome participants to this afternoon's session for the.
Okay, meaning trumps sound. So when you're thinking about teaching word parts or teaching words, so like the base word heal, you can do the word heal and you can do the word health. So it changes how it's pronounced, but the meaning is still important and is probably the more important part. So as you're thinking about teaching spelling and vocabulary and things like that, we're also really need to think about the meaning. One that really stood out to me today was the word sign, which is connected to the word signal, which is why the G is there. Okay, so understanding the meaning and like other words that they're connected to will help us with spelling as well as reading words. So just be thinking about that. And then just one more piece here. So Van Cleve also presented this idea that we should be building these sound or morpheme walls with our students. And this is probably at a higher grade, like middle school. You might be able to do this in 5th grade or lower grades if you'd like. But obviously you wouldn't have this up the entire year. You would build that with students, but then you can explain words based on the meanings of the words. And if you have already gone over these with students, it's just going to stick with them more and they're going to remember it.
That's all so good, Becca. I love learning all that stuff. One thought that I had that we didn't add it in as a slide is that when you do get to a new word, because syllable types are still so much in my head and I love them so much. One other thought that I had is that when students get to an unknown word, the first thing that they do is they look, if they're trying to figure it out and they can't figure it out, ask, are there any prefixes or suffixes, and cover up the prefixes and suffixes and look at that middle word. And that can be for encoding or decoding. So, so instead of looking just for the vowels or vowel parts and looking for syllables, first ask, like, as they're learning prefixes and suffixes, are there prefixes and suffixes, and then figure out, and I guess I'm kind of looking at that with more of a primary level too, when prefixes and suffixes are pretty simple with what they're decoding. Okay, so this slide though is about submorphemes, and these are fascinating to me. I love the 2 one because it just came up on the 2/22 day where there was a lot of talk about the number 2. So TW is often meaning 2 of something. It's not a morpheme by itself. TW by itself does not mean 2. But it's in a lot of these other morphemes or in these words that have the meaning of 2. So twin, most of these are pretty obvious: twin, twice, 12. Between is between 2 places. Twill is the fabric where it's 2 pattern. It's knitted together and there's 2 rows together. Twist is 2 things. Twilight is one of my favorites because it's daytime and nighttime coming together. So it's when 2 times of the day come together. My other favorite TW one that's not on here is twig, because it's where a branch splits in 2. So if kids know this, they know how to spell the number 2, and there's not confusion, at least for that, 2, 2, and 2. They'll know which one is the number 2 because they know TW means 2, and they'll have kind of this window into a lot of other words. So there's a few other ones here, and it's not 100%, you know, I'm sure that there's SW words that don't mean this, but this is some of the kind of more common examples. One I like about from this chart is GL. GL together often means like, it's like the glitter, it's luminosity. So it's like a lot of times something sparkly, glint, glisten, glitter, glow, glee. And so knowing some of this stuff it just kind of shows the fun part of words. This information I find is a little bit harder to find than just morphemes, but it's a fun way to teach our kids that language is really cool and to explain some of the spelling in some of the common words or themes of words that they'll get to or that they'll find. There's a link at the top of this slide for this page. And this is a worksheet. So if you go to this link, you can download this worksheet and use it in your class. And this is a way to work through new words. So to teach and dissect a specific vocabulary word that you want your students to learn. So they'll write down the definition, they'll write down characteristics of that word, what the word actually is, and then the decoding it, you can connect it straight to syllable types or prefixes and suffixes, and then give examples and non-examples. Antonyms are really important and non-examples are really important when learning new words. I really like the connection on this worksheet to the decoding it. I think that's really cool because that's going to be what really glues that in their mind as spellers, and connects it to other word parts, and you could really take it apart that way. So this I thought, I haven't used this with kids, but I really liked it. I thought it was pretty neat. So I think we're kind of coming to the end here. We might end a little bit earlier, have some time for questions and discussions. The next few slides are just some of our favorite things we want to share with you. So books for background knowledge. Louisa Moats is the one that Becca used a lot, and she wrote the LETRS curriculum, if you've heard of that. LETRS is a program that a lot of schools are using to train teachers. She's a leader in knowing about how English works. Speech to Print is her book that is like packed with everything that we should know, since we should be experts in our language. It's in Speech to Print. That ABC and All Their Tricks books, the orange reference book, is a book that's like $15 book that every teacher should have on their shelf, because you can look up any spelling pattern and it tells you like how many words use that pattern and kind of how common it is. Morpheme Magic is a really great curriculum. Deb Glasser is kind of one of the leaders in morphemes and morphology. And this curriculum is designed to open and teach to students about morphemes, prefixes, suffixes, and roots. One of our 5th grade teachers at our school is using it and has had a lot of success and has really liked using it this year with her class, because it just gives her the structure that makes these lessons a little bit easier. And then there's some other great links there of some of our favorite things that we've talked about. There is, if you are on Facebook, there's a great Facebook page that's called Science of Reading, What I Should Have Learned in College. And there's a big giant main group, and then there's an Oregon group and a K2 group and a 3rd through 5th grade group. So there's connections out there if you're a Facebook person. And there's a few other great, so that's one of the, Emily Hanford has had a few great podcasts about how kids learn how to read and how we are teaching them how to read in our schools. So that's a link to her first one, but she has, I think, 4 now that she has a lot of podcasts, but 4 that are focused on how we are doing as teachers and how the school systems in our country are doing teaching kids how to read. And this shows what we've been doing all year with this. Next month, we are going to be talking about fluency, and the month after that is comprehension. So we have 2 more of these, and I'm really actually excited for fluency and comprehension, because when Beck and I are preparing for these, we actually learn a lot ourselves, and we really enjoy our conversations and our research that we do for this. And fluency and comprehension are things that I'm really excited to jump more into. Fluency, we're going to focus on writing and reading fluency, so the encoding and decoding together, and explore that together. And fluency is something that we so commonly use as that 1 minute test of how fast they can read. So it's a big thing that we talk about in schools, but we don't really ever talk about it. So we're hoping to jump into that more. And while we're on this slide, the next slides are just basically our contact information, a link to the website that shows our other presentations and slideshows. But while we're on this, I'm just kind of curious because we are kind of wrapping up here. So if you want to sign off, you can. But those of you that have been here with us before and have gone to any of these other ones, I'm really curious about how it's going in your classroom or in your tutoring, and seeing what you've used or haven't used, or how it has been going, or what questions have come up since then, or what's easy or hard, or I'm just kind of curious, like, how's this going in our classrooms? What goes well? What's hard? What questions do you still have? And so let's open it up for that. We'll stay on for 10 or 15 minutes or however long people want to stay. And if you also want to sign off and say goodbye, you're welcome to do that too. So thank you so much for coming tonight.